We're just waiting for a few more people to join before we kick off. Okay, I suggest we get started and other people join. We can pick they can pick up where we are. Welcome everybody. Thanks for joining the Power to Change launch of our report, Financing the Future Economy, which is really the kickoff of our work about how we can start working with community businesses and to help them find the right finance to achieve their ambitions as we move forwards. I'm Tim Davies-Pugh, Chief Executive here at Power to Change, and for those of you who are new to us, hopefully not too many, we're a think and do tank that backs community business. We're here really to launch our report around financing the future economy and what it really means to unlock finance for community businesses. So it's a report that we've looked back over the history of what's worked for us, what other people lessons have learned, and hopefully to bring that into a kind of one place to look at how we can look at what's best to achieve affordable, flexible, accessible finance for community businesses as we move forwards. I'm really pleased to be joined by an expert panel. So we have Jo Gideon, Conservative MP for Stoke-on-Trent Central, where she's been the MP since 2019. But I think for perhaps more importantly for the people on this call, it's that you've been a really great champion of civil society and social enterprise across your kind of career in Parliament, including chairing the all-party parliamentary group for social enterprise. I'm also pleased that we have Melissa Mean, who's one of the founding directors of We Can Make, fresh off site with high vis and hard hat. But it's a community-led programme in the northwest area of Bristol, which is really looking at across urbanisation, arts, technology and public participation. And it also one of the board members of Power to Change, which I'm really pleased about. And Annabelle Smith, who's Director of Place and Practice at the Centre for Progressive Policy, where she leads the Work on Inclusive Growth Network, working with cities and regions across the UK to build a better understanding of what inclusive growth looks like, as well as informing policy at a national level. So welcome. And in a moment, I'm going to hand over to Jessica Craig, who's part of the policy team at Power to Change and has been the lead author of this report. But before I do, a couple of things just to inform you about. So we are using Teams webinars, so I'm not sure how many people are familiar with it. Zoom is obviously been the webinar facility of choice for so much time, but we're moving over to Teams. So it should work in pretty much the same way, although if you do have questions, there's a Q&A function, but you can also feed them in through the chat. And post this event, we'll send you a link to both the report and a recording of this webinar. And finally, can I ask you to kind of keep the conversation going on X, Twitter, with @peoplebiz, which is our tag, as well as anything else I do. So I will now hand over to Jess, who's going to run through a brief summary of the kind of highlights of the report, and then I will ask each of the panel members for their reactions to it, and then we'll have a chance for some questions from the audience. So Jess, over to you.
Thanks very much, Tim. Can I just double check that you can see the slides that I'm sharing as well? There might have been a thumbs up. If there was a thumbs up, I can't see you.
I can see it, yeah.
Perfect, great. Thanks very much. And hi, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I am delighted to be sharing our brand new report with you. This is a significant piece of work that brings together our learning from Power to Change's experience back in community businesses. I hope that at some point later today, you'll all have a chance to go away and check out the report. But for now, I just want to give you an overview of some of the findings and the recommendations within it. Since 2015, we've been working with our partners to understand the funding and finance needs of community business, and we've invested in interventions to test and develop innovative ways of funding and supporting them. As a result, we've learned a lot about how and when community businesses access money to start up, grow and diversify their businesses. We've seen what types of investment work best for them and the barriers they're facing. And we've used what we've learned to advocate for community businesses to be able to access the funding and finance they need to fulfill their ambitions. The reason that we do this is because we know that community business works. When community businesses are backed with the right finance, support, and enabling policy conditions, they create stronger communities and better places to live. And by doing that, they're helping to build a fairer, more inclusive economy and a better future. We've written this report to share all that we've learned about unlocking finance for community business, and because we want to help others to do the same. That's why we've also shared a range of recommendations for funders, social investors, and local, regional, and central government. And we're ready to work with them to make more affordable, flexible, and accessible finance for community businesses possible. So on to the report. The report looks at many of the major types of funding and finance that community businesses use and the relative challenges and merits. It also looks at challenges across the life cycle of community businesses and those particular to certain types of activity like asset ownership. Much like mainstream businesses, community businesses depend on income from trading to build their financial sustainability. But they also require other sources of funding like grants and loans to be able to build their trading income, for example, by expanding their services or taking on new spaces. The vast array of sources and types of finance for community business can be a good thing. It means community businesses can identify the most appropriate type of financial support for their needs at a particular time or to support a particular activity. That's what we call in the report the right finance at the right time for every community business. But in reality, it's not always easy for community businesses to access the finance they need when they need it. The complexity of the finance landscape can make it challenging for community businesses to find what they need, and they often spend a lot of time looking for the right amount or type of funding, only to find that it won't come quick enough or can only be offered on terms that don't align with their needs or values. Finance is often not available on the scale that is needed, which means community businesses have to piece together lots of smaller bits of funding, making their finances look something like a patchwork quilt of different income streams. But patching up the gaps in community business finance is not sustainable. The current reality prevents them from reaching the full scale of their ambitions. So on to the recommendations. We've used the findings and everything that we've learned to shape a series of policy recommendations to funders, social investors, and all levels of government. We think that each of these actors has a part to play in unlocking the affordable, flexible, and accessible finance community businesses need to achieve their ambitions, and we want to work together to make this happen. So first of all, looking at recommendations to funders and social investors. We know that funders and social investors already recognise the value of community business through the investments they make, but they can and must go further to deliver the finance community businesses want and need. We recommend that funders ensure the grant funding they provide helps community businesses to diversify their income streams and build access to other forms of finance. Approaches like enterprise grant making, where grants match income increases from trading, can help community businesses to grow their trading income and increase their resilience. Next, we want to see funders enabling greater equity of access to funding by simplifying their application processes, using plain English and providing pre-application support, and funding flexibly in line with community business needs. All these steps could help to reduce the time and resource burden faced by community businesses and empower those organisations that are typically underrepresented in funding opportunities. Lastly, the report shows that concerns about the affordability and patience of social investment, so that's how soon it needs to be repaid and on what terms, hold many back from using this type of finance. Community businesses need long-term, affordable investment from social investors and transparency about the terms on which these deals are offered. Blended finance, which combines grants and social investment loans, can help community businesses to begin taking on repayable capital and demystify social investment. But there's also appetite among community businesses for more innovative and tailored social investment products, such as those where repayments are linked to their turnover or that allow some repayment in social value, as is offered by Kindred, the social investment and support vehicle in the Liverpool City region. We also acknowledge that in order to make this possible, social investors need access to cheaper wholesale finance, but we'd really like to see them focus on passing on any reductions in the cost of capital to the communities that they serve. Next, looking at recommendations to local and combined authorities. So devolution has created opportunities for local and regional authorities to play a greater role in strengthening community businesses and the wider social economy. Firstly, we want to see local and regional government recognise and resource the role of community businesses and other social purpose business models in creating inclusive growth. Adopting an inclusive growth approach can help ensure community businesses have a voice in economic development strategy and access to any associated funding. And it could also enable councils to resource community businesses through their own commissioning and procurement practices. Local and combined authorities should also be channeling funds like the UK Shared Prosperity Fund or its successor funds to provide small grants and business support to community businesses, and also consider whether capital funds, such as from the Levelling Up Fund, could help communities to purchase or refurbish assets that provide a vital source of social infrastructure in their communities. Finally, local and regional authorities can also play powerful roles in convening other funders and investors to leverage additional funds and make their public money go further. This could involve working with local anchor institutions, as Camden Council has been exploring with its Community Wealth Fund, or it could involve developing a credible partnership to provide social investment at the regional level and on terms which meet local needs, as in the case of Kindred in Liverpool. And both those examples are covered in the report. Finally, looking at recommendations to central government. With an election on the horizon, it's time for central government to embrace the role of community businesses in driving good local growth. The next government needs a coordinated approach to growing and nurturing the social economy, both across government departments and with local and regional government. This would finally give social enterprises and community businesses the policy attention and coherence they deserve, and that's required to resolve the challenges they're facing. Place-based funding, such as Whatever Succeeds Levelling Up funds, and dormant assets should be used strategically to provide long-term and flexible investment in community businesses. We'd also want to see community business and social enterprise become a key pillar of any future industrial strategy. Government also has a key role to play in unlocking and incentivising more investment in community business, such as through introducing a successor to social investment tax relief and exploring how to unlock more private and institutional capital for organisations that struggle to access finance. Lastly, we want to see government continue to support and fund community asset ownership by extending the Community Ownership Fund and supporting Power to Change's proposal for a high street investment vehicle. This would act quickly to purchase strategic vacant high street buildings and transfer them into community ownership. You can read about each of these recommendations in the full report on our website. So to conclude, I want to tell you a bit about how this report fits into our future plans. This report is part of our major new programme of work on financing the future economy. Community businesses are a vital part of building a fairer, more sustainable economy fit for the future. But as this report highlights, accessing the finance to fulfil this role remains a major challenge. Through this programme of work, we're listening to and amplifying the voices of community businesses in order to raise awareness of the challenges they face. We're working with others to test innovative approaches and advocate to unlock more and better finance for community businesses. We're continuing to support the development of the community shares market through our investment in the Community Shares Booster Fund. We're also continuing to partner with the School for Social Entrepreneurs to provide enterprise grants and support for early stage community businesses. This year, we're excited to be working with more partners to launch an expanded programme, so watch this space. And we're investing in blended finance as part of the Energy Resilience Fund, supporting community businesses to retrofit energy generating and energy saving technology on community owned or managed buildings. We're also continuing to partner with the Liverpool City region, North East and West Midlands combined authorities to grow and strengthen the community business sector in these places and to address access to finance challenges through a place-based lens. Across all of this work, we'll be gathering insights to inform our policy approaches and to advocate for community businesses to be able to access the right finance at the right time for them. So I hope that's given you a flavour of what's in the report and the work still to come. Please do check out the report and get in touch if you want to join us in this work. I'm really looking forward to hearing our panellists' reactions and your questions, so I'm going to hand back to you, Tim.
Thanks, Jess. And yeah, I'd encourage you to read the report and feedback, questions, comments, not just in this event, but afterwards. I'm sure Jess will welcome those as we try to build more onto this as we go forwards. And we have some things obviously happening, as Jess mentioned, and again, check our website out because there'll be more on that as we move forwards as well. But now turning to some reactions, and I'd like to go to Joe if I can first, just to give us a bit, I suppose, a political take on the report, and really, I suppose, how you think government can help us unlock access to finance for community businesses.
So, Tim, thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me onto the panel, and thank you for the sneak preview on the report, and congratulations on it, I have to say. And progress in our country is made through innovation, and thanks to entrepreneurs who dare to think differently, commercial success can be combined with real social impact. Businesses with a social purpose deserve more recognition. The UK has 100,000 social enterprises employing some 2 million people, and the sector contributes 60 billion to the UK economy. Before becoming the Member of Parliament for Stoke-on-Trent Central, I was involved in setting up several social enterprises. And I know it took an immense amount of passion to keep them going, as I faced many barriers along the way. So I really applaud the resilience of small business leaders in our community. They are the people who dare to think differently, creating positive solutions in challenging times and ultimately driving up Britain's growth and well-being. And that's why the latest report by Power to Change is so important, because unlocking finance is probably one of the biggest challenges that has to be tackled when we look at how to create a thriving policy environment to support enterprise. I think it's fair to say that the Levelling Up agenda has focused on competitive funding pots and national programmes. Attempts to level up from the top down can overlook the biggest resource available for regeneration, communities themselves. The roots of a successful economy lie in the households and communities where people live and where they can play a part. The report picks up on things like the Dormant Asset Scheme, which I've long campaigned for access to for Community Wealth Fund. So I'm delighted that it has recently received more funding. And it's a perfect example of what happens when public, private and civil society sectors come together in partnership to drive change and support those most in need. But we can do more. One of the things I would have found useful when setting up a community business is an enterprise platform which provided information about finance needed at different levels, from startup to scale up and beyond, which I know is one of your recommendations. In a previous role, I led a project on knowledge management for small businesses, looking at how we access information, called Knowledge is Power. And the same is true today. There are many financial resources on offer for those community businesses who know how to navigate the system. But repeatedly, I see that people who know where to look are the people who possibly need it the least. The people who have the great ideas but lack the expertise in sourcing finance may encounter the computer says no attitude from their local high street bank and give up, which would be a tragedy. I was once on a panel where there was a question about barriers to getting a small business up and running and growing. And I said I thought the biggest problem was access to finance. But actually, several of the people around the table said, no, the biggest barrier is actually understanding finance, knowing how to work out your numbers, because borrowers will need to demonstrate an understanding of their numbers in order to be creditworthy. So whilst this report highlights some great things, we shouldn't stop here. We shouldn't only focus on how to get the money in, but we should look further and look at advances to how to advance financial literacy and helping people understand how making the numbers add up. Many people who are motivated through identifying social need would be great at the front line facing the community end. The back office, though, is essential to the sustainability of the business, and it needs support from accountants and people who will challenge the business model and be able to number crunch in a way that maybe the founder of the business can't. I've also long argued that social enterprise should sit within business and trade rather than DCMS. If you're encouraging business growth, we need to define social businesses as businesses with a social purpose rather than seeing them as charity. Community businesses have a benefit much greater than business, spanning the health economy, welfare, transport, treasury, environment. So, I absolutely agree with the recommendation that it's got to be a cross-departmental approach to community businesses. We're being restricted in our thinking by existing definitions and an inadequate framing of the world of social enterprise, community business and businesses that benefit the community. And our inability to define it has led to government's inability to provide an adequate support network to adequately play its role in supporting what we all agree has an immense value to society. Maybe we need a mapping exercise of the sorts of community businesses there are and the routes to funding and finance, so we can unpick the complexity of access to finance. Otherwise, we end up with a patchwork of funding from various grants, as this report sets out. I've experienced exactly this when I set up a veterans charity. I spent a disproportionate amount of time hunting relatively small grants in order to prove that the business was investment worthy. Vital organisations often struggle to access finance from mainstream lenders. So I've been championing easy access to startup finance from local community lenders who understand and have empathy for the borrower and the cause. And that's why I've been working closely with Dave Fishwick of the Bank of Day fame to see if we can grow a network of community banking, which is embedded in communities across the country. Unfortunately, receiving the right type of finance can be tricky for those pioneers. All too often, high street banks don't understand the business models of community-run pubs, social groups, and social groups for elderly people, or cafes providing low-cost meals and employment to locals. Banks and even government find it easier to understand and fund capital investment rather than revenue funding, which is what the vast majority of community businesses are looking for. So I really commend this report and back each of its recommendations, supporting community businesses and other forms of social enterprise to access the funding and investment that they really need, both to start up and to grow.
Thanks, Jo. And there's lots in that, which I'm sure people will be starting to sort of formulate questions for. So I won't pause to question you myself, even though I would love to run several questions past you on that. But I will now turn to Melissa. So Melissa, as a kind of one of those community business leaders that we've just been talking about, that Joseph's been referring to, I guess, what do you think is needed next to ensure that there is long-term accessible and affordable finance and investment for community businesses?
Yeah, thanks, Tim. And yeah, nice to follow you, Jo. I was just in Stoke at the weekend at your football stadium, actually. So all very, very nice. Yeah, this is a great report. It's a really valuable map of like the funding landscape and all of its complexities. And I think that is one of the kind of first things we need to do is deal with that complexity and make it a bit kind of simpler. But absolutely read this report, and it's full of brilliant examples of the people who have managed to navigate this stuff, and it's really hard. But I think the line that really struck a chord with me in the report was the one where it says communities at the moment are overlooked as economic actors, and community businesses are not backed in the same way as traditional businesses with subsidies and support to attract further investment. And I think that's the fundamental point. Like when it comes to money, community businesses, we're just kept tinkering at the edges, and it's like it's just not good enough anymore. And I, for one, am completely fed up with it. And it's kind of like there's three reasons why not to do this. Like you look at the evidence going back onwards. Centre Right think tank looked back at 60 years of regeneration programs, and I found the only ones that developed any meaningful economic change were the ones that involved and invested in communities and the soft infrastructure that really makes places tick. You know, just invested in a new roundabout really doesn't get you very far. The second thing, if you look forward, and you know, this report is about financing the future, and I think it's really important to look at the type of future we're facing at the moment, and it is one of, you know, a polycrisis of rapidly rising inequality. 6 out of 9 planetary boundaries have been breached. We're looking at 2.5 degree kind of raise in temperatures. If we don't start moving money and resources in radically different ways, there is no hope of averting a kind of planetary and human disaster. And then third, there's like the evidence in front of my eyes when I sit in my neighbourhood in Knoll West in Bristol. So We Can Make is a community land trust, and we've got a micro factory where we train local people to use locally sourced biomaterials and digital fabrication tools to make low carbon homes 100% affordable. We've built 2 homes so far, and we've got 40 more in the pipeline. And we know the value of doing and creating homes in this community business way is massive. So we used a couple of tools, Hacked and Toms, which count the social value of doing things. And we found that our homes generated £3,600 worth of social value per square metre. So that's things like local jobs, carbon save, boost in health and happiness. I was talking to the now ex-mayor of Bristol, Marvin Rees, and he was looking at these numbers, and his line was like, well, that's like getting the homes for free, because that's, you know, you're generating far more value than the cost of building them. Like getting the homes for free, and that's the value that community businesses can do. The problem is the way that we set up our financial rules and our regulations, the system cannot see us, understand us, value us, or invest in us. So could we get any finance to do those first 2 homes? Oh my God, welcome to the struggle, boss. Geez. And we had to just basically take a massive gamble on taking a short-term, short-term, high-cost social value loan, because that was the only finance that we had available. And we gambled on being able to refinance after the kind of 18-month interest-only payments. We gambled, and I have to tell you, it didn't pay off, because in that time since when we took out the loan, Ukraine happened, other events happened, and it's actually impossible to get any other cheaper finance. So we're in a situation where we're having to use our tiny reserves to kind of service that loan. That is not good enough, and it cannot be sustainable for us or anyone else. So I think, and our journey is just like one microcosm of what all the kind of community businesses out there are doing to struggle. So I think there's 3 shifts that we really need, and these shifts really echo on and build on the recommendations in this report. And the first shift is a shift in the role of government, from being kind of market fixing, where it sees the primary role of government is just removing barriers and regulations and kind of getting out of the way, to much more of a market shaping role. So really using the resources to attract kind of investment. And I think we want to end the myth that there is no money. As looking at the figures, in 2021, government spent 258 billion on subsidies to business in tax breaks, direct payments. 258 billion. Like, that dwarfs anything given in grant to community businesses. And the problem at the moment is we're spending those subsidies on the wrong things that are not very future facing. So, for example, Drax, nuclear power company, gets almost £1 billion a year in subsidies to a burning timber. That's more than kind of £2.5 million a day in subsidies to do that. All that stored up carbon gone in a puff. What if instead that subsidy was used to co-invest in community-led solar, wind, or what if it was used to kind of co-invest in 100 neighbourhood micro-factories that could use biomaterials to use long-lasting, affordable homes? So that's the first shift. Second shift needs to be a capacity shift. There's tons of talk about capacity, and it's generally focused on the community businesses that we have to get ready, we have to be better, we have to prove our worthiness to be investable. I think there needs to be as much, if not more, on the other side in helping lenders and investors understand us and our potential and be ready to be good collaborators and invest alongside us. It needs to be easy for me as a community-led housing kind of scheme to get finance as it is for a buy-to-let mortgage or somebody who's looking to do student flats. Let's make it easy. And then the third shift is about a shift in scale. I think there's a massive misconception about community businesses of being kind of one-off projects or a nice bit of trading on a Sunday by volunteers. We are much bigger than that. And then over the last year, I've been working with an emerging set of community asset developers focused on neighbourhood and city scale transformation. So it's things like renewable energy, retrofit, community-led housing, artist hotels. It's really a brilliant set of civic level infrastructure development going on. And I think the big what if question is, what if this asset class, what if this infrastructure generating community asset developers was properly capitalised at the level it really needs to be? And there is where the massive potential and the massive value could be. And it's not just in financial return, but yes, we'd absolutely deliver a financial return, but it's also the wider surplus that we generate in people's lives, neighbourhoods, society, through what community businesses are brilliant at doing, as well as financial stuff. It's the connection, the belonging, the participation, agency, joy, health, all that stuff that we know is important for human flourishing and building that future that we all want to be part of. So this is what I'm here for, and it's brilliant to be working alongside Power to Change, who's backing this set of emerging community asset developers to really help this stuff kind of scale. And I'd leave like 3 recommendations. Like, read this report. Number 1, there's a ton of good stuff in there. 2 other recommendations, a report from Dan Hill and Mariana Mazzucato, mission-based. So they've done a really great report called Modern Housing and Environmental Common Good. Got brilliant stuff about setting out a pathway, how you shift resources in this direction. And then finally, a report by Civic Square and Dark Matter Labs on 3-degree neighbourhoods. That sometimes you look at the future, you think it's very bleak, but actually there's a ton of stuff that we can really get behind and make things better. So yeah, let's do it.
Thanks, Melissa. Yeah, definitely take recommendation one, read the report, and then work your way through the other recommendations. Annabelle, if I can turn to you now. I mean, obviously your work is focused on creating the policy and practical conditions for inclusive growth. So how are you seeing that kind of community businesses and alternative business models are creating such inclusive growth? And how can getting the right finance at the right time to community businesses really help that build that inclusive growth and help a more inclusive economy going forwards?
Thanks, Tim. So I'm going to zoom out a little bit to give a bit of a sort of macroeconomic picture for where this plays a really important role in building a more inclusive economy and a new type of growth. So we know that economic growth and economic growth across the UK is a key political priority across the spectrum. And we know that we need a new model of economic growth that as many people and places can contribute to and benefit from and have a real meaningful stake in. Businesses have a really clear role to play here. They're essential actors in our society that, as others have alluded to, have for far too long been seen as bystanders on social issues, concerned only with the company-specific goal of maximisation and not their wider community. And we know that by and large that often isn't the case. So supporting community business and other alternative business models that are really firmly rooted in our communities is absolutely pivotal to making economic growth a more democratic process and giving more people and more places a really meaningful stake. And as others have mentioned, we really need a systems-based cross-sectoral partnership approach to ensuring that community businesses get the right support at the right time. So this report from Powers Change is really vital in setting out how that can happen in practice. Now, the politics of discontent that we're seeing at the moment is in part driven by a profound sense that economic growth is too concentrated and is too top-down. And this sense of decoupling between communities and decision makers, we're in a moment where this is sort of threatening to further polarize our politics and further threatening to polarize our political institutions. So addressing this disconnect between communities' lived experiences and the current model of growth and the dominant model of growth that we see will require, bold policy, as Melissa's alluded to, and greater community ownership and agency over our places' economic futures is central to that, but that will require a real radical shift in how we conceive of our economy and ultimately what our economy is for and who it's for. So government, whether that's at national, regional or local level, has a massive role to play in supporting businesses to invest more in the economic, social and environmental fabric of our places. At the moment, it's easier to put forward a more extractive model of business operation than it is, as we've seen through Melissa's example, to actually meaningfully contribute. And one area that I just want to touch on briefly that the report picks up on is around devolution. And its role in supporting community business to access finance. So we know now that there is a real clear, strong cross-party consensus around particularly mayoral combined authority level devolution. And as Jess mentioned, the forthcoming general election at some point this year, we know that if Labour forms a government, they'll be asking all areas of England to move towards joining together in a mayoral combined authority. So the argument more broadly, to some extent, has been won around regions and places having more say over economic planning. But what we need to really make sure that we do at the national level is make sure that mayoral combined authorities don't essentially become outposts of Whitehall that replicate all of the same top-down and challenging fragmented funding processes. And I think politically and from a policy perspective, where there is a big gap in thinking across the political spectrum is around community agency and accountability, or some are calling that double devolution to communities, and the democratisation of growth. So we know that local growth strategies are currently and will be a key part of MCA level devolution moving forward. Labour is saying that all combined authorities under a Labour-led government will be required to produce one. So one kind of quick win would be requiring these strategies to encompass the social economy and alternative business models as a central aspect to make sure that we don't mirror those top-down processes and that we have a standardised approach to really centralising the social economy in our inclusive growth strategies. And we've seen that some combined authorities, for example, West Midlands, are already leading the way here. So we're not starting with a blank sheet of paper. There is a huge amount of good practice out there already. You know, them and other places are embedding social economy in their inclusive growth approach and setting themselves the goal of doubling the size of this sector within 10 years. So we need to make that the standardised practice rather than subject to the will of individual places and individual leaders. So we're seeing this kind of innovation and entrepreneurialism from certain places, but we need to make that the standard. And then just finally, we need a really clear national framework for measuring social impact, working to build a consensus around measurement so that businesses' social contributions can be transparently and comparably assessed. So there are clear kind of, you know, relatively straightforward interventions that can be made that will make a massive difference. So I'll stop there and look forward to the discussion.
Thanks, Annabelle, and thanks to Melissa again and Joe for reflections on the report. So we have a couple of questions in already. Please do use the Q&A function if you want to drop some stuff in. But I suppose just coming back on a point you were making, Joe, which kind of reflected in the question, is obviously the report covers a kind of range of funding for social purpose organisations. But I wonder, a little bit picking up on what you were saying around the role of perhaps the traditional private sector funding to community and social organisations, and I wonder if you could just sort of say a little bit more about how you think that could work.
Yes, I have to say, when I listened to Annabelle, I was kind of slightly worried about the idea that the civil service and mayoral authorities could have desktop exercises to sort out investment in social enterprise and community businesses, because I kind of think that in order for community businesses to be sustainable, they have to be viable and credible, and therefore why wouldn't they be just as investment worthy as somebody who's running a local barber's shop, if you like. And so in a sense, the challenge is we shouldn't be seeking to fund things that are unsustainable, but look to encourage, and this is very much at the micro level, because I understand that there are huge community businesses that operate at a much higher level, but at the sort of micro level, I do think that we need entrepreneurship and kind of local government handouts. To me, don't kind of quite sit in the same space. Is that a shocking thing to say? I do think we should invest in our communities. That's a different thing. So it's kind of investment as an enabler is one thing, but actually the kind of funding of the getting going bit and everything should sit within a kind of regular investment profile of people who want to lend to good causes.
Thanks. Yeah, and I suppose then, Melissa, sort of building up your experience. So you private finance should be there. I think would say that we hear a lot from community businesses. They are very vocal about the fact that they are trading sustainable bodies, and as you said, kind of creating houses that work, and and when you add the other factors in, are almost like free housing. So why isn't the private sector lapping this stuff up? Why isn't it coming to you?
I mean, I think there's a couple of things. One of the reasons about how rules and regulations about who can fund who. So I made the point that it should be as easy for me, my fantastic community-led housing scheme. I should be able to go and get finance from the kind of local bank as easy as somebody who's trying to do a buy-to-let mortgage. But I go to the bank and they can lend to a private individual, they can lend to a company, they cannot lend to a community land trust. So it's dead. I mean, it's crazy. So that's one problem. The other problem is that you talk to a bank and basically they won't get our bed for less than £5 million. And there's we're seen as too small and too fragmented for them to bother with. We're just kind of annoying. So I think part of the work that we're doing as community asset developers that we're doing and trying to get ourselves recognised as an asset class is kind of mutualising and coming together. And so if we can have, my favourite kind of lines, because I absolutely believe it, is the next big thing is going to be lots of small things. So can we bring together, I know there's 300,000 kind of community-led homes in the pipeline who are all struggling to get finance. What if we bring those together and we can collectively de-risk ourselves and have a shared conversation with those institutional and pension investors, and then we become an asset class that is recognisable, it de-risks us in the eyes of investors, and makes it much simpler for us to kind of go forward. And I think that's why it's kind of capacity building on both sides. But I think it's about we need to bring that together and have a kind of collective kind of ask. And then this, there's a jet stream of money, big money is out there, and we just need to kind of pull it down and be kind of visible to that. And all of the good stuff that government can do to encourage much more place-based investment in pension funds and things like that, that's got to be good. So have other people pointing at us, and us coming together will begin to make us more investable.
Thanks, Melissa. And Annabelle, it's come back. Obviously, the devolution point is, I think, is quite an important one. We've also are working with 2 combined authorities, but devolution itself doesn't necessarily mean that those authorities will pick up this challenge of funding and the economy and community social organisation. So is there something that you feel will incentivise them to do it? What is it that might be missing that will help to incentivise that?
Yeah, I think it's an important point, and I think that combined authorities and place leaders more broadly have an important enabling and capacity building role to play. So it isn't necessarily the case around the state investing huge amounts of money, but as conveners of place, they play a vital role. And that doesn't necessarily need to happen at the MCA level. So in Melissa's part of the world in Bristol, Marvin Rees, the former mayor, set up something called the One City approach, which was about bringing together the collective firepower and the collective capacity of public, private, VCSE, education sectors, and ensure that their outputs are more than the sum of the parts. And they created something called City Funds, which is a sort of blended finance cross-sectoral partnership with the aim of securing long-term access to finance to deliver the region's key specific priorities. And that brings together a blended model of patient investment, grant funding and pro bono support. And it's had a huge impact with other places wanting to replicate that. So bringing together that kind of key actors across different sectors is key. But I think coming back to the point about devolution and MCA level devolution specifically, I just think that there isn't much political attention anywhere to accountability sort of downwards. So there's a lot of talk about, well, how do we make sure that mayors are accountable to government and that the correct forums are in place for that? Absolutely, but people and communities need to sort of feel that their CA is accountable to them and intelligible to them. So I think there's something around, whether you want to call it community power, whether you want to call it double devolution, something that is a kind of standardized framework for making sure that CA's goal of driving economic growth is as much about who is able to contribute to that and how are we going to create an enabling environment. And as we've seen, there are lots of great places already doing that, but they're doing that sort of through their own initiative. So let's try and make it standardized.
Thanks. And then just
to add in that, just
Go on,
obviously say the kindred and the fact that you managed to pull off the fact that some of the kind of like loan is repayable in social value is a real game changer. So like if we're going to standardize, can we standardize towards excellence in that kind of regard? At the moment, social value, you're kind of like, it's a performance game generally, and all it enables you to do is access expensive finance. But I think what Kindred are doing is genuinely kind of game changing. So much more of that, please.
Thanks. Yes. Yeah. Definitely. And Annabelle, just picking up on the devolution, we've talked about the sort of regional. There's a question about what about the role of sort of pan-regional partnerships like the Northern Powerhouse or the Western Gateway? Do you sort of how do they perhaps figure in the devolution and how they might contribute to this work?
Yeah, I think it's an important point. I mean, so Western Gateway, for example, Northern Powerhouse, a lot of it comes down to sort of how do we conceptualize economic value and where do we see economic value as deriving from. And as much often in the public sector as a private sector, there's this notion around capital investment and infrastructure and investing in stuff, so investing in transport and investing in regeneration, and of course all of that's incredibly important, but I see as much of the regional, pan-regional, sub-regional role of economic development as being about driving social and human capital and social value. And we know that obviously social and economic value go absolutely hand in hand. So I think they do play an important role. I think what I've sort of seen predominantly from the ones that you mentioned, there is a real focus on physical infrastructure and physical regeneration, and not enough of a focus on kind of human capital, and I think that's an important challenge.
Thanks. And Jess, a question to put to you about how we're joining up with other organisations in the sort of sector. So how do we work with Social Enterprise UK or co-ops, Employee Ownership Association in this sort of space? And well, clearly we are, but I'll let you answer that one.
Yeah, and I just want to kind of add a point on to what Annabelle was saying about pan-regional partnerships there. I completely agree. I think there needs to be more of a focus on that kind of human capital and social capital, and less on the kind of this stuff. I think a lot of money goes into that physical infrastructure already. I think that introduces an important and interesting question about scale. So, at what scale are community businesses and other social enterprise organisations best served in terms of investment, but also I've heard from the panelists a really sort of strong theme about the support that needs to be wrapped around that. So I think that kind of suggests that we need a much more kind of cohesive and strategic marketplace for finance for community businesses, where community businesses are not having to kind of run around, as Melissa said, looking for small bits of finance that can top you up until something better comes along. But how could we be combining across these different levels of geography, across different funders, so those that are focused on social purpose organisation, those who are focused on sort of more institutional investment, and also government, to sort of realise a much more cohesive approach to funding, to supporting, and also the kind of the policy that needs to go alongside that. To the question about our work with other organisations, so I did mention in my remarks some of the work that we have coming up with some of our partners as part of our work on financing the future economy. So the purpose of the investments that we're making in those partnerships is to test what we see as potentially some of the innovative forms of finance, to see what can work in terms of getting community businesses the right finance at the right time for them, and also to rule out what doesn't. So through those relationships and those investments, we will be continuing to learn, sharing what we're learning, and then using that as part of our advocacy. I think you mentioned SEUK explicitly in your question, Charles. So I just wanted to also sort of plug the Future Economy Alliance, which is a partnership of lots of people who believe in purpose-driven business. We can pop a link in the chat, but we are part of that campaign, really trying to just kind of amplify the role of community businesses and social enterprises in delivering that sort of fairer, more inclusive future economy that we really want to see.
Thanks. There's a question, probably our final question we'll have time for today, about the sort of looking beyond England to sort of Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland for this type of work. And Jess, I wonder if you want to say just a couple of words about how we might want to absorb some of that learning and how the report's picked up on those things. I would say that we also chair and coordinate the Community Ownership Fund Advisory Board, which has a slightly remit in this space as well, and does obviously look at the UK-wide perspective. And then, Joe, perhaps if I could come to you, again, just for how government is perhaps thinking about this at a UK and Northern Ireland sort of a wide sort of take on this. So Jess first, and then on to you, Joe.
Sure. So I think looking to other nations within the UK, but also around the rest of the world, is really important in terms of looking for opportunities for innovation and best practice. It's certainly something we're trying to explore more in our work. And as you mentioned, Tim, the remit of the Community Ownership Fund Advisory Board is across the whole of the UK. So as part of that, the focus of that is to look at what the future of community ownership funding in the UK should look like, and to make suggestions around the sort of policy resources and support needed for communities to take ownership of the assets that matter to them. What we're seeing within that forum is that there is huge difference in funding availability, the policy context, and the sort of infrastructure of support available to community businesses and to communities to take on assets, even within the UK. So I think there's definitely a role for government in trying to introduce some coherence about all of those things. So that's why we kind of in the report are recommending that there is a sort of strategy for the social economy that sits across government and across the different levels of government. But it would be great to see more sort of funding coordination across the whole of the UK too. But yeah, in our High Streets paper last year, we also looked at international examples, particularly more so on the sort of the policy side, but definitely looking at sort of funding mechanisms too could prove really fruitful in terms of innovating the forms of finance available.
Thanks. And Joe, final words before we wrap up.
Yes, I just wanted to bring it back to community banking. If you look at what America does, if you look at what other European countries do, they have far more regional banks, they have far more mutuals. The secret to being able to access reasonable finance in your area for the benefit of your community is to have banks based who care about the local communities. And the challenge is quite simply that the financial regulator makes it so onerous for anybody to set up an alternative financial institution that that those people, and there are plenty of them within the banking world who would like to see this happening, say, it's technically too difficult. So we have to make it technically not too difficult, and that's my personal campaign.
Thanks. So we are at time, I'm afraid. It always seems a shame when the kind of conversation just starts to get going, really. And I'm sure we could have had another hour on this, but unfortunately we need to bring it to a close. So I'd just like to thank Joe and Annabelle and Melissa for being able to join us today and add the comments in. We will keep the dialogue going, hopefully. If there are things that you'd like to talk about, raise questions about the report, have ideas or even solutions, then please email Jess and let her know, and we'll certainly share and be picking those up as we go forwards. We will share after this to all attendees a link to the report. Is in the chat, but we'll send it out, and a link to this recording of this webinar so you can watch back anything you missed or share with others that might find it useful. And so, yeah, thanks again to Joe, Annabelle, Melissa, and Jess for presenting today and for their comments, and thank you all for attending.